Montana Territory, 1872. The bitter wind howled across the open prairie like a hungry wolf, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Zeke Alderson pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his lean frame as he guided his faithful paint horse across the frozen ground. At 25, Zeke had already lived several lifetimes worth of hardship on the frontier, each experience carving lines of caution around his eyes that belied his youth. The setting sun painted the vast landscape in hues of gold and crimson, a beauty that was lost on Zeke. He'd learned long ago that beauty in this untamed wilderness was merely a distraction, one that could get a man killed if he dropped his guard. The frontier demanded constant vigilance, leaving no room for sentimentality or attachment. Another day, another dollar, he muttered to his horse Dash, the only companion he allowed himself these days. That's all a man can count on out here. Zeke had made peace with solitude. After losing his parents to fever and his brother to an Indian raid, he'd constructed walls around his heart as solid as any frontier fort. The West was no place for love or family, only survival. He drifted from ranch to ranch, hiring out his skilled hands for cattle drives, breaking horses, and whatever other work would keep him fed and moving. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. As the last light faded from the sky, Zeke spotted a thin plume of smoke rising in the distance. A homestead likely, though this far out it was unusual to see one standing alone. His instincts told him to ride wide and avoid it. Other people's troubles weren't his concern, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way the smoke wavered, thin and desperate against the darkening sky. "Not our business, Dash," he said, but found himself turning his horse toward the distant cabin anyway. The bitter night air would be settling soon, and while he was accustomed to sleeping under the stars, the prospect of a warm hearth for the night was tempting enough to risk human interaction. As he approached the small homestead, Zeke's trained eye noted several worrying details. The corral fence had broken sections, the barn door hung precariously from one hinge, and the woodpile was dangerously low for the approaching winter. A single milk cow lowed mournfully in the shabby barn, and chickens scratched listlessly in the hard-packed dirt of the yard. Before Zeke could announce himself, the cabin door burst open, and a woman emerged with a shotgun pointed squarely at his chest. "State your business or turn around," she called, her voice steady despite the visible trembling of the barrel. Zeke raised his hands slowly. "Just passing through, ma'am. Thought I might inquire about a place to sleep for the night." "Happy to pay or work for it." The woman hesitated, then lowered the shotgun slightly. The fading light revealed her to be young, no more than 22 by Zeke's estimation, with honey blonde hair tied back in a practical but hastily arranged bun. Her blue calico dress, though clean, showed signs of mending, and her face, while strikingly beautiful with high cheekbones and full lips, carried the drawn pallor of exhaustion. "I have no room for strangers," she said, but her voice wavered as a child's cry sounded from inside the cabin. She glanced back nervously, her resolve visibly crumbling. Zeke recognized the look of someone barely holding things together. "I'm no threat, ma'am. Zeke Alderson is my name. I've been working cattle for the Diamond K, just finished a drive. I can sleep in your barn and be gone by morning." The woman studied him for a moment longer, her light brown eyes calculating. Another cry from inside the cabin made her decision for her. "Olivia Travis," she said finally. "Mrs. Travis, you can use the barn, Mr. Alderson, but I'll need to see you're armed, no more than necessary first." Zeke slowly revealed his Colt revolver, removed it from his holster with 2 fingers and set it on the ground. "Just this and my rifle, ma'am. Standard fare for a man traveling alone." Mrs. Travis nodded curtly. "You may keep them, the barn is there, I have a child inside who needs tending." With that, she retreated into the cabin, leaving Zeke to settle himself and Dash in the dilapidated barn. Inside, he found evidence of neglect everywhere: rotting boards, rusted tools, and barely enough hay for his horse. The place was falling apart, and from the looks of things, it had been for some time. "What's a young woman with a child doing out here alone?" he muttered to Dash as he unloaded his saddle. The frontier was cruel to men, but it was downright merciless to women, especially those without protection. After tending to his horse, Zeke stepped outside to survey the property in the gathering darkness. His experienced eye noted a dozen urgent repairs needed before winter truly set in. The homestead wouldn't survive the season in its current condition. As he stood contemplating this, the cabin door opened again and Mrs. Travis emerged, this time without the shotgun. She carried a small tin plate with what appeared to be cornbread and beans. It isn't much, she said, extending the plate toward him, but I can't in good conscience let a man go hungry when I have food to share. Zeke was surprised by the gesture. That's mighty kind, Mrs. Travis, but you and your little one should keep what you have. We have enough, she insisted, though Zeke suspected otherwise. Please take it. Their fingers brushed as he accepted the plate, and Zeke noticed calluses on her delicate hands, the mark of someone unaccustomed to hard labor but recently acquainted with it. Thank you, he said simply. Mrs. Travis lingered, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cold. Mr. Alderson, I noticed you looking at the property. It's in poor shape, I know. Been a rough spell? Zeke asked, though the answer was evident. She straightened her spine, pride flickering across her features. My husband Daniel passed 6 months ago, thrown from a horse. I've been managing as best I can with Emily, my daughter. She's 3. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Travis. Thank you, she hesitated, then added with visible difficulty, if you're willing. I could use a day's work before you move on. I can't pay much, but I can provide meals and a place to sleep for a few days. Everything in Zeke warned him to decline. Getting involved in this widow's troubles meant delays, attachments, complications. The smart play was to eat, sleep, and ride out at dawn as planned. I'll see what I can do, he heard himself say instead. Relief washed over Olivia Travis's face, softening the worry lines around her eyes. For a brief moment, Zeke glimpsed the beauty that hardship had been steadily erasing. Thank you, Mr. Alderson. Good night. As she walked back to the cabin, Zeke silently cursed his own foolishness. One day, he told himself, he'd fix the most pressing problems and be on his way. No sense in getting attached to a widow and her child. That kind of thinking led only to heartache, and Zeke Alderson had experienced enough of that for one lifetime. But as he settled into the hay, the image of Olivia Travis's grateful smile lingered in his mind longer than he cared to admit. Morning arrived with a biting chill that confirmed winter's approach. Zeke was up before dawn, assessing the homestead in the gray light. The situation was worse than he'd initially thought. The cabin's roof had several spots where daylight shone through, the well pump was barely functional, and the chicken coop was one strong wind away from collapse. He was repairing the corral fence when Olivia emerged from the cabin, her daughter balanced on her hip. The little girl had her mother's honey-blonde hair and wide, curious eyes. Good morning, Olivia called, visibly surprised to find him already at work. You're an early riser. Lights burning, Zeke replied, hammering a nail into place. Your fence won't fix itself. Emily watched him with solemn interest, one thumb tucked firmly in her mouth. When Zeke nodded at her, she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. She's shy around strangers, Olivia explained. We don't get many visitors out here. She set the child down, keeping hold of her hand. I've got breakfast if you're hungry. Zeke drove in one last nail. I appreciate that. Inside the cabin, Zeke was struck by both the tidiness and the poverty of the place. Everything was meticulously clean but worn to the point of disintegration. A few pieces of rough furniture, hand-hewn by an amateur carpenter, likely Daniel Travis, occupied the small space. The fireplace provided the only heat, and a curtain separated the single room into living quarters and sleeping area. Olivia served a modest breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee. As they ate, Emily gradually overcame her shyness, peering at Zeke with increasing boldness from behind her mother's skirts. Your husband built this place? Zeke asked, noting the cabin's solid foundation despite its current disrepair. Olivia nodded. 3 years ago, we came out from Ohio with dreams of our own land. A shadow crossed her face. Daniel was better with horses than with hammers, but he was learning. What happened to him, if you don't mind my asking? Mustang he was breaking reared and fell backward. Crushed him? Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Zeke recognized the carefully controlled pain behind it. By the time I found him, it was too late. Zeke nodded, understanding now why the barn and corral had been the first things to fall into disrepair. You planning to stay on here? This is our home, she said simply. I have nowhere else to go, and no means to get there if I did. After breakfast, Zeke returned to his work outside, while Olivia tended to her meager garden and cared for Emily. Throughout the day, he found himself watching her more often than he should, noting the determination in her movements despite the weariness evident in her face. She was fighting a losing battle against nature, poverty, and isolation, yet she persisted with a quiet dignity that Zeke couldn't help but admire. By sundown, he had repaired the corral, fixed the chicken coop, and split enough firewood to last several weeks. His muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor. Breaking horses used different muscles than swinging an axe, but there was satisfaction in seeing the immediate improvements to the homestead. Over another simple meal, Olivia's gratitude was palpable. "You've done more in one day than I could have managed in a month, Mr. Alderson." "Zeke, please," he said, surprising himself with the invitation to familiarity. "Zeke then," she smiled, and for a moment the hardship seemed to fall away from her features. "And I'm Olivia." That night, as Zeke bedded down in the barn, he made mental calculations of what still needed fixing and how long it would take. The roof would require at least a day's work, the well needed attention, and the barn door was barely hanging on. One day had turned into several in his mind without him consciously deciding to stay. "Just until the most urgent repairs are done," he told Dash, who nickered softly in response. "Can't leave them vulnerable with winter coming." The next morning, Zeke climbed onto the cabin roof to assess the damage, while Olivia watched nervously from below, Emily clinging to her skirts. "Be careful," she called up. "Daniel fell from there last autumn trying to patch it." Zeke found several rotten boards that needed replacing immediately. "You got any lumber?" he called down. "Some in the barn." Daniel had plans to expand the cabin. In the barn, Zeke discovered a modest stack of rough-cut pine boards, enough for the repairs if used judiciously. As he carried them out, he noticed a folded paper that had fallen from between the planks. Opening it revealed a crude but detailed plan for adding a second room to the cabin. When he showed it to Olivia, her eyes filled with tears. "I'd forgotten about this," she whispered, tracing the pencil lines with her finger. He wanted to give Emily her own room. "It's a good design," Zeke said, studying the drawing. "Simple but solid." "Another dream that died with him," Olivia said softly, folding the paper and tucking it into her pocket. That afternoon, as Zeke worked on the roof, a rider approached the homestead. Olivia tensed immediately, calling Emily to her side as she went to meet the visitor. From his vantage point, Zeke watched the interaction, ready to intervene if necessary. The man was well-dressed, riding a fine horse, clearly not a drifter or bandit. After a brief conversation that Zeke couldn't hear, the man handed Olivia an envelope and rode away. When Zeke climbed down, he found Olivia sitting on the porch steps, the opened envelope in her trembling hands. "Bad news?" he asked. "Notice from the bank in Clearwater," she said, her voice hollow. "The mortgage payment is 3 months past due. If I can't pay $50 by the end of the month, they'll foreclose." $50 might as well have been $500 for a widow barely subsisting. Zeke knew the story well. Too many homesteaders lost everything to banks when luck turned against them. "How much do you have?" $12.37, she replied, the precise accounting revealing how carefully she'd been counting each penny. "Everything else has gone to feed us and keep us alive." She looked up at him, desperation briefly visible before pride reasserted itself. "I'll find a way, I always do." But Zeke had seen enough of the homestead to know that no amount of determination could conjure $40 from empty fields and a single milk cow. That evening, after Emily was asleep, Olivia joined Zeke by the small fire he'd built outside the barn. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the flames dance against the darkening sky. "Why are you helping us?" she asked finally. Most men would have ridden on. Zeke poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "Needed a place to stay for a few days." "We both know you've done far more than what room and board would cover," Olivia persisted. "You could have been halfway to the next county by now." Zeke considered her questions seriously. Why had he stayed? The sensible part of him, the part that had kept him alive in the unforgiving West, had been urging him to move on since that first morning. Yet something about Olivia Travis and her precarious situation had compelled him to remain. "I know what it's like to lose everything," he said finally. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. My brother was killed by raiders 2 years later." He rarely spoke of his past, but the quietness of the night and Olivia's genuine question loosened his tongue. "Been drifting ever since. Guess I recognize the look of someone fighting impossible odds." Olivia was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry about your family," she said softly. Zeke shrugged. "It was a long time ago." "Time doesn't heal all wounds," she observed. "It just teaches us to carry them differently." She stared into the fire. "Some days I wake up and reach for Daniel before remembering he's gone. Other days it feels like he's been dead for years." "Does it get easier?" Zeke asked, then immediately regretted the question. To his surprise, Olivia considered it thoughtfully. Not easier, different, I keep going because Emily needs me. Without her, she left the thought unfinished. They sat in silence until the fire burned low, each lost in private memories. When Olivia finally stood to return to the cabin, she paused beside Zeke. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for the repairs, but for being here." Before Zeke could respond, she was gone, a slender shadow moving through the darkness toward the cabin. That night, lying in the hay, Zeke made a decision. He would stay until the homestead was winter-ready, then ride to Clearwater. The cattle outfit he'd worked for previously had mentioned needing hands for a late-season drive. If he could secure that job, he might be able to help with the bank payment before moving on. It was a temporary solution, a bandage on a wound that required stitches, but it was something. And despite all his hard-earned wisdom about remaining unattached, Zeke couldn't bring himself to ride away knowing Olivia and Emily faced not just a harsh winter but homelessness as well. The next morning brought another complication in the form of a racking cough from Emily. The child was feverish and listless, causing Olivia's face to crease with worry. "She needs a doctor," Zeke said after watching the little girl struggle to breathe. "Nearest doctor's in Clearwater, 20 miles away," Olivia replied, pressing a cool cloth to Emily's forehead. "I can't leave her and she's too sick to travel." Zeke didn't hesitate. "I'll go. What medicine does she need?" "Doctor. Mitchell will know what to do. Tell him it's Emily Travis with fever and chest congestion." Olivia bit her lip, but Zeke, doctors cost money. "I've got enough," he said, though in truth, his funds were limited after months between proper jobs. "I'll be back before nightfall." The ride to Clearwater was punishing, with Zeke pushing Dash harder than he liked. The small frontier town appeared on the horizon by midday, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the stagecoach route, with the promise of civilization in the form of a church steeple and a two-story hotel. Dr. Mitchell, a graying man with kind eyes and a harried manner, listened to Zeke's description of Emily's symptoms with growing concern. "Sounds like it could be lung fever," he said, gathering supplies into his medical bag. "With a child that age, we can't take chances. I'll come with you." The doctor's fee and medicines took most of Zeke's remaining cash, but he paid without comment. As they rode back to the Travis homestead, the doctor made conversation. "Olivia Travis, you say? Poor woman's had a terrible run of luck. Daniel was a good man, not the most practical farmer, but he adored his wife and daughter." The doctor gave Zeke a sidelong glance. "You a relative?" "Just passing through," Zeke replied, "staying to help with some repairs." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Good to hear she's got some assistance. I've been worried about her out there alone, especially with winter coming." He adjusted his hat against the wind. "Banker Simmons isn't known for his patience with late payments, either." "You know about the mortgage?" Zeke asked. "Small town," the doctor said with a shrug. "Everyone knows everyone's business." Daniel borrowed to buy stock and equipment right before his accident. Bad timing all around. By the time they reached the homestead, twilight was gathering. Olivia met them at the door, relief and fear mingling on her face as she ushered the doctor inside to where Emily lay whimpering on the small bed. Zeke remained outside, tending to the horses and giving the family privacy. When Dr. Mitchell emerged an hour later, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "Caught it early enough, I think. The medicine should bring down her fever by morning, but she'll need careful watching for the next few days. Keep her warm, plenty of fluids, and give her the powders I left with Olivia every 4 hours." After the doctor departed, Zeke entered the cabin to find Olivia sitting beside Emily's bed, stroking her daughter's hair as she slept fitfully. "Thank you," Olivia said, looking up at him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "If you hadn't gone for the doctor." "She'll be fine," Zeke assured her, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Doctor said so." "I'll pay you back for the doctor's fee," Olivia insisted, somehow. Zeke shook his head. "No need, get some rest, I'll take first watch with Emily." "I couldn't ask you to." "You didn't ask." "I offered." Zeke pulled a chair next to the bed. "I've sat vigil for sick folks before, get some sleep while you can." After a moment's hesitation, Olivia relented, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. She settled onto the small pallet on the other side of the curtain, and within minutes her breathing deepened into sleep. Throughout the night, Zeke tended to Emily, giving her medicine when she stirred and cooling her forehead with damp cloths. The child's trusting eyes, so like her mother's, followed him whenever she was awake, and her tiny hand gripped his finger with surprising strength. As dawn broke, Emily's fever finally broke as well. When Olivia woke and came to check on her daughter, the relief on her face was palpable. "Her skin is cooler," she said, pressing her lips to Emily's forehead, "and her breathing is easier." "She's tough like her ma," Zeke said. Olivia looked up at him, taking in his exhausted state. "You stayed awake all night." "Someone needed to." A moment of understanding passed between them, something deeper than gratitude or obligation. Zeke found himself noticing the golden strands in Olivia's honey-blonde hair where the morning sun touched it, the delicate curve of her jaw, the strength in her slender hands as they tucked the blanket around Emily. Breaking the moment, Zeke stood abruptly. "I should check on the animals." Outside in the crisp morning air, Zeke berated himself for the unwelcome feelings stirring within him. Attachment was dangerous. He'd learned that lesson through blood and heartache. Olivia Travis was a widow in need of help, nothing more. Once the homestead was secure and the bank situation resolved, he would move on as he always did. But as the days passed and Emily recovered, Zeke found himself increasingly integrated into the small family's routine. Mornings began with breakfast together, followed by work on the homestead. Evenings ended with stories by the fire, Emily often falling asleep in Zeke's lap as he recounted sanitized versions of his adventures on the frontier. The child's unquestioning acceptance of him was disarming. She followed him around the property, asking endless questions, offering to help with tasks far beyond her capabilities. Zeke found himself explaining things he'd never thought to articulate: how to tell a storm was coming by watching the cattle, why horses needed to be approached from the front, which stars to navigate by on a clear night. Olivia, too, was changing in his presence. The constant tension in her shoulders eased somewhat. She smiled more, particularly when watching Zeke interact with Emily. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he caught her observing him with an expression he didn't dare interpret. As the cabin repairs neared completion and Emily regained her strength, Zeke knew his self-imposed deadline for departure was approaching. The mortgage payment loomed, and his plan to earn the money with a cattle drive needed action, not just intention. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Emily had gone to bed, Zeke broached the subject. "I'll be riding out tomorrow," he said, watching the flames rather than Olivia's face. "There's an outfit in Clearwater looking for hands for a drive down to Wyoming. Pays good, should be enough to cover that bank payment with some left over for supplies." Olivia was silent for a long moment. "You don't have to do that," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "You've done more than enough already." "I know I don't have to, I want to." Zeke risked a glance at her. "The homestead's almost ready for winter now, roofs solid, woodpiles stacked, barns secure. But none of that matters if the bank takes it all." "And after," Olivia asked, the question hanging between them, "after the cattle drive?" It was the question Zeke had been avoiding in his own mind. The sensible answer, the one consistent with everything he believed about survival in the West, was that he would collect his pay, ensure the Travis mortgage was settled, and ride on to the next job, the next temporary arrangement. "I don't know," he admitted. Olivia nodded, accepting his honesty if not the answer she might have hoped for. "We'll be here," she said simply, "whatever you decide." The next morning, Zeke prepared to leave with mixed emotions he refused to examine closely. Emily clung to him, not understanding why her new friend had to go away. "Will you bring me a present?" she asked, her lower lip trembling. "Emily," Olivia chided gently, "Mr. Alderson isn't going to a store." "Sure I will," Zeke said, crouching to Emily's level. "What would you like?" The child thought seriously for a moment. "A pony," she suggested hopefully. Zeke chuckled. "How about a hair ribbon? Blue to match your eyes." Emily nodded solemnly, as if closing an important business deal. "And candy." "And candy," Zeke agreed, ruffling her hair before standing to face Olivia. She held out a small package wrapped in cloth. "Some food for the journey." "Thank you." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. "Be careful," Olivia said softly. "The trails aren't safe, especially with winter coming." "I always am." Zeke mounted Dash, looking down at the pair, the woman standing straight and proud despite everything, the child waving enthusiastically, something twisted in his chest. "I'll be back," he found himself promising. 2 weeks, 3 at most." Olivia nodded, her expression guarded but hopeful. "We'll hold you to that, Zeke Alderson." As he rode away, Zeke fought the urge to look back, knowing that if he did, his resolve to maintain emotional distance might crumble entirely. Clearwater was busier than during his previous visit, with cattle buyers and cowboys filling the saloon and boarding houses. Zeke found the trail boss, Harlan McCready, holding court at a corner table in the Golden Spur. "Alderson," McCready greeted him with a nod. "Heard you might be looking for work." "That's right," Zeke confirmed. "When's the drive start?" 3 days, taking 500 head down to Cheyenne. Pays $40, half now, half on delivery." "I'll take it," Zeke said immediately, the amount exactly what he needed for Olivia's mortgage payment. "Good, we leave at dawn Thursday." "Don't be late." With the job secured, Zeke had 2 days to prepare. He used the advance to purchase supplies for the Travis homestead: coffee, sugar, flour, and other necessities that Olivia would never spend her limited funds on. He also bought the promised blue ribbon and candy for Emily. While in the general store, Zeke overheard a conversation that sent a chill through him. "Simmons is already counting that Travis place as good as his," a clerk was saying to a customer. "Says he's got a buyer lined up from back east who wants to expand his holdings." "Seems harsh," the customer replied, widow with a young one and all. "Business is business." "Simmons says if the payment isn't made by the end of the month, he'll have the sheriff out there to evict her the very next day." Zeke's hands tightened on the counter. The banker's eagerness to foreclose suggested he had more to gain than just recovering a bad loan. With new settlers arriving daily and land values rising, the Travis homestead, while modest, represented an opportunity for profit if it could be acquired cheaply and resold. Leaving the store, Zeke made his way to the bank, determined to at least buy Olivia more time. Inside the imposing brick building, he asked to speak with Mr. Simmons. The banker was a corpulent man with cold eyes and an insincere smile. "What can I do for you, Mr. Alderson?" "I'm inquiring about the Travis mortgage." Simmons's expression sharpened. "Are you a relative?" "No, a friend. I understand there's a payment due." "There are several payments due, Mr. Alderson. Mrs. Travis has fallen significantly behind in her obligations." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "I'm afraid the matter is quite serious." "I'll have the $50 by month's end," Zeke said. "I'm asking if you'll accept that as good faith and give her more time for the rest." Simmons leaned back, studying Zeke with new interest. "You seem quite concerned about a woman you claim is merely a friend." "The point is," Zeke continued, ignoring the insinuation, "Mrs. Travis has no intention of abandoning her property. The payment will be made." "I see." Simmons tapped his fingers on the desk. "Very well, Mr. Alderson. Bring the $50 by the end of the month and we'll discuss further arrangements. But I should warn you, the Travis mortgage is substantial. One payment will only delay the inevitable unless there's a significant change in her circumstances." Leaving the bank, Zeke felt both relief and unease. He'd bought Olivia time, but the underlying problem remained. Without a steady income, she would eventually lose the homestead, regardless of his intervention. The cattle drive began as scheduled, with Zeke and 7 other cowboys herding the restless steers southward. The work was familiar, hard, dangerous, and all-consuming. But for the first time, Zeke found his thoughts constantly drifting back to the small cabin and its inhabitants. He wondered if Emily was fully recovered, if Olivia had managed to harvest the last of her garden before the frost, if they were keeping the fire stoked through the increasingly cold nights. On the 4th night, as they camped near a creek, one of the other cowboys, a weathered man named Jenkins, nodded toward Zeke's preoccupied expression. "Got a woman waiting somewhere?" he asked, passing a flask of whiskey. Zeke took a small sip before answering, "Not exactly." Jenkins chuckled. "That means yes in cowboy talk." "It's complicated," Zeke admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "Always is with the good ones," Jenkins said sagely. "My Millie waited 3 years for me to stop drifting and settle down. Best decision I ever made, marrying that woman." "You're married?" Zeke asked, surprised. Most cowboys were confirmed bachelors. Jenkins nodded. 5 years now. "Got a little place outside Clearwater. Do these drives to supplement what the farm brings in." He studied Zeke. "There's more to life than dusty trails and lonesome nights, son." "Took me too many years to figure that out." The conversation stayed with Zeke through the following days as the drive continued southward. He'd never seriously considered settling down, not since losing his family. The idea of being responsible for others, of creating connections that could be severed by violence or misfortune, had seemed like inviting pain. But watching Jenkins, who rode hard all day then wrote letters to his wife by firelight each night, Zeke began to question his long-held belief that the frontier was no place for love. Perhaps the harshness of the West was precisely why connections mattered, not a weakness to be avoided but a strength to be cultivated. 10 days into the drive, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm spooked the herd, triggering a stampede that sent cattle crashing through the camp. In the chaos, Zeke was thrown from his horse and trampled, sustaining a deep gash to his leg and several cracked ribs. The trail boss wanted to leave him in the next town with a doctor, but Zeke refused. "I need to get back to Clearwater," he insisted through gritted teeth. "Got obligations there." "You're in no condition to ride," McCready argued. "I'll manage." Against everyone's better judgment, Zeke remained with the drive, his leg bound tightly and his ribs wrapped. Each day was agony, but the thought of Olivia facing the banker and possibly losing her home drove him forward. They reached Cheyenne 2 days behind schedule. After receiving his pay, Zeke immediately began the journey back to Clearwater, pushing himself and dashed to their limits despite his injuries. The return trip was a blur of pain and determination. When he finally rode into Clearwater, it was the afternoon of the mortgage deadline. Zeke headed straight for the bank, arriving just before closing. Simmons was visibly disappointed to see him. "Mr. Alderson, I had begun to think you wouldn't make it." Zeke counted out the $50, the Travis payment in full and on time. The banker reluctantly accepted the money and wrote out a receipt. "As agreed, this satisfies the immediate arrears. However, the next payment is due in 30 days. "I'm aware," Zeke said, taking the receipt and turning to leave. "Mr. Alderson," Simmons called after him, "my offer to Mrs. Travis still stands. If she wishes to sell the property now, I can ensure she receives enough to start fresh elsewhere. It would be the sensible course given her circumstances." Zeke paused at the door. "Mrs. Travis isn't interested in selling." "No, perhaps you should ask her yourself. After all, winter is coming and a woman alone with a child. It's a precarious situation." The insinuation that Olivia might be better off surrendering her home lingered in Zeke's mind as he rode out of town. His injuries throbbed with every hoofbeat, but he pressed on, determined to reach the Travis homestead before nightfall. The cabin came into view just as the sun was setting, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. Zeke felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the sight, something close to the feeling of coming home after a long absence. Before he could dismount, the door flew open and Emily ran out, her face alight with excitement. "Zeke's back, Mama." Olivia appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to joy to concern as she noticed his haggard appearance. "Emily, be careful," she called as the child reached up to be lifted from his horse as usual. Zeke managed to dismount without collapsing, though the effort sent fresh waves of pain through his battered body. "Hey, little one," he greeted Emily, settling for ruffling her hair instead of picking her up. "I brought you something." He retrieved the blue ribbon and candy from his saddlebag, presenting them to the delighted child. Emily immediately ran back to her mother, proudly displaying her treasures. "You're hurt," Olivia said, approaching him with worried eyes. "It's nothing," Zeke tried to dismiss, but swayed slightly on his feet, betraying his condition. "Inside now," Olivia ordered, taking his arm to steady him. "Emily, go put your ribbon away while I help Mr. Alderson." Once inside, Olivia helped Zeke to a chair and began examining his injuries with gentle but thorough hands. "What happened?" "Stampede," he explained tersely. "Got caught under some hooves." "These bandages need changing," she said, noting the blood seeping through the crude wrappings. "And those ribs need proper binding." As Olivia tended his wounds, Zeke produced the bank receipt from his pocket. "Got the payment in just under the wire." Olivia paused in her ministrations, looking from the paper to Zeke's face. "You didn't have to do that." "I said I would." "At what cost?" She gestured to his injuries. "You pushed yourself too hard getting back here." "Had to make the deadline." Olivia shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "No homestead is worth your life, Zeke Alderson." "Wasn't just about the homestead," he admitted quietly. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had been ready to voice. Olivia's hands, gentle on his bandaged ribs, trembled slightly. The moment was interrupted by Emily's return, proudly wearing her new ribbon. "Do I look pretty, Zeke?" she asked, twirling to display the blue satin in her blonde curls. Prettiest girl in Montana territory, he confirmed, grateful for the diversion. That night, Olivia insisted Zeke sleep in the cabin rather than the barn due to his injuries. She made a pallet for him near the fire, while she and Emily took the bed behind the curtain. As Zeke lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of mother and child, he confronted the realization that had been growing within him for weeks. The next mortgage payment would come due, and the one after that, in an endless cycle that Olivia couldn't possibly sustain alone. His intervention had bought time, nothing more, but what if it wasn't just about buying time? What if there was another solution, one that involved not riding away but staying? The thought terrified him more than any stampede or gunfight ever had. Morning brought clarity along with pain. Zeke rose early despite his injuries, building up the fire and putting coffee on to boil. When Olivia emerged from behind the curtain, her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes still soft with sleep, his decision solidified. Morning, he greeted her, pouring a cup of coffee and offering it to her. You should be resting, she chided, accepting the cup. Been thinking, Zeke said, gathering his courage, about the homestead, about what happens next. Olivia's face grew guarded. I told you before, you've done more than enough. Once you're healed, you're free to move on. What if I don't want to? The cup paused halfway to her lips. What do you mean? This place has potential, Zeke said, focusing on practical matters first. Good water, decent soil. With proper management, it could support a small herd of cattle, not just that milk cow. Maybe some horses too. Oh, Zeke, I've been drifting for 8 years, he continued, needing to get the words out before courage failed him. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots, never wanted to. The West seemed too uncertain, too dangerous for attachments. Olivia set down her cup, her eyes never leaving his face. And now I'm thinking maybe the danger isn't in forming attachments. Maybe it's in never having anything worth fighting for. He took a deep breath. I'm asking if you'd consider letting me stay, Olivia, not as a hired hand. As a partner. A partner, she repeated carefully. To start with, he clarified, his heart pounding. I know it's sudden, I know you're still grieving Daniel, I'm not asking for promises. Just a chance to see if we could make something work here, for the homestead, for Emily, for us maybe in time. Olivia was silent for so long that Zeke began to fear he'd misjudged everything. Then softly she asked, what changed your mind, about attachments being dangerous? You did, he answered honestly. You and Emily, watching you fight for this place, seeing how you care for her even when everything seems impossible. It made me wonder if I've been running from the wrong things all these years. Emily chose that moment to emerge from behind the curtain, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She climbed into Zeke's lap without hesitation, settling against him with complete trust. Zeke is staying for breakfast. She asked hopefully. Olivia looked at her daughter, then back at Zeke, her expression softening. I think, she said carefully, Zeke is asking if he can stay for much longer than breakfast. Emily's eyes widened with delight. Forever and ever. That would be up to your mama, Zeke said, his eyes on Olivia. It's not a simple thing you're proposing, Olivia said, though there was no rejection in her tone. There would be talk in town. Assumptions. I'm aware. And the next mortgage payment is still coming, partner or not. I've thought about that too, Zeke said. That cattle drive showed me there's good money in livestock. With my experience and your land, we could start small but grow. It wouldn't be easy, but it could work. Olivia studied him for a long moment, seeing beyond the confident words to the vulnerability beneath. You're asking me to trust you with everything I have left in this world, she said quietly. My home, my future, my child. I know it's a lot to ask. It is, she reached out, taking his hand in hers. But then you've already trusted me with quite a bit yourself, haven't you? Coming back here injured, letting me tend your wounds, sharing your past. Hope flickered in Zeke's chest. Does that mean you're considering it? It means, Olivia said with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, that I think Emily is right. Breakfast is a good place to start. And then we'll take it one day at a time. It wasn't a full commitment, but it was an opening, a chance to prove himself not just as a temporary helper, but as someone who could be counted on for the long haul. For now, that was enough. Over the following weeks, as Zeke's injuries healed, he and Olivia settled into a tentative partnership. They worked side by side preparing the homestead for winter, discussing plans for expanding the livestock and improving the fields come spring. In the evenings, they sat by the fire while Emily played with her few toys, sometimes talking late into the night after she had gone to bed. Zeke learned about Olivia's life before the frontier, her childhood in Ohio, her courtship with Daniel, their dreams of building something of their own in the West. She, in turn, listened as he gradually revealed more of his past, including the painful memories he'd kept buried for years. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed in Clearwater when they traveled into town together for supplies. Whispers followed them through the general store, and the shopkeeper's wife made pointed inquiries about their arrangement. "People will talk," Zeke said as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. "Maybe I should sleep in the barn again for appearance's sake." "Let them talk," Olivia replied with unexpected firmness. "We know the truth of things between us. Besides," she added with a hint of mischief, "winter's coming. The barn's too cold for those ribs of yours to heal properly." The days grew shorter and colder as November deepened toward December. When the first heavy snow blanketed the homestead, Zeke and Olivia stood on the porch watching Emily frolic in the fresh powder, her laughter bright in the crisp air. "She hasn't laughed like that since before Daniel died," Olivia said softly. Zeke's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You've done right by her, Olivia. She's a happy child despite everything." "Not just my doing," she squeezed his hand. "Having you here these past weeks, it's changed things for both of us." The simple acknowledgement warmed Zeke more than any fire could have. "For my too." That evening after Emily was asleep, Zeke brought out a small package he'd been saving. "Got something for you in town," he said, slightly embarrassed by the gesture. Olivia unwrapped the paper to reveal a small book of poetry. "Zeke," she breathed, running her fingers over the tooled leather cover. "This must have cost." "You mentioned once that you missed reading," he said, cutting off her concerns about the expense. "Thought you might like something besides that old almanac." Olivia opened the book reverently, then looked up at him with eyes shining in the firelight. "No one's given me a gift just for myself since," she trailed off, emotion catching in her throat. "You deserve nice things," Zeke said simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then with gentle deliberation, Olivia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a kiss as soft as a whisper but unmistakable in its meaning. When she pulled back, Zeke remained perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell of what had just happened. "I think," Olivia said carefully, "that whatever partnership we're building here isn't just about the homestead anymore, if it ever was." "No," Zeke agreed, finding his voice. "It isn't." "I'm not ready to let go of Daniel's memory," she continued. "I might never be completely, but I'm ready to make room for something new, if you're patient enough to let it grow at its own pace." "I've got nowhere else I need to be," Zeke assured her, taking her hand in his. December brought Christmas preparations that were modest in means but rich in spirit. Zeke rode into the mountains and returned with a small pine tree that Emily decorated with popcorn strings and paper cutouts. Olivia baked special bread with their precious store of white flour, and Zeke carved a wooden doll for Emily that became her instant treasure. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, the three of them sat before the fire in a moment of contentment that seemed miraculous given the circumstances of their meeting just months before. "I have something to ask you both," Zeke said, his voice unusually solemn. Emily climbed into his lap, her favorite perch. "Is it a Christmas surprise?" "Sort of," he looked at Olivia. "Been thinking about what happens when spring comes, about our arrangement." Olivia's expression grew watchful, and "I'd like to make it permanent, officially." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Olivia. Not just for the homestead or for appearances, but because these past months have shown me what I was missing all those years on the trail. A home, a family, you." Emily gasped with delight, but Zeke kept his eyes on Olivia, whose face had gone very still. "You don't have to answer now," he added quickly. "I know it hasn't been that long since." "Yes," Olivia interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zeke Alderson." Emily erupted in cheers, bouncing in Zeke's lap. "Does that mean Zeke will be my papa now?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning for all three of them. Olivia looked at Zeke, leaving the response to him. "If that's something you'd like, Emily," he said carefully, "I won't ever try to replace your real pa. He'll always be special to you and your mama. But I'd be honored to be a father to you, in my own way." Emily considered this with surprising seriousness for a child her age. I think I would like two papas, she decided finally. One in heaven and one here with us. The simple wisdom of her answer brought fresh tears to Olivia's eyes. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, vibrating with excitement about the changes to come, Zeke and Olivia sat together by the dying fire. Are you sure about this? Olivia asked quietly. Marriage is a big step from partnership. I've never been more sure of anything, Zeke replied. The moment I rode up to this homestead, something changed. I just didn't recognize it right away. And what was that? I stopped running, he said simply. From the past, from connections, from the possibility of loss. For the first time since my family died, I wanted to stay somewhere, with someone. Olivia leaned against him, her head finding the spot on his shoulder that seemed made for her. I never expected to love again after Daniel, she confessed. It felt impossible, like a betrayal even to consider it. And now, Zeke asked, scarcely breathing. Now I understand that the heart doesn't work that way. It doesn't replace love with new love, it expands. She looked up at him, her expression open and vulnerable. I love you, Zeke, not instead of Daniel, but in addition to him. Differently, but just as truly. The words washed over him like a benediction, healing wounds he hadn't known were still raw. I love you too, Olivia Travis, you and Emily both. Their second kiss was deeper than the first, a promise and a beginning rolled into one. New Year's Day 1873 dawned clear and cold. The small church in Clearwater was filled with curious townsfolk as Zeke Alderson and Olivia Travis exchanged vows before the weathered preacher. Emily stood beside them, clutching her wooden doll and beaming with pride in her blue dress with the ribbon in her hair that matched her eyes. Dr. Mitchell and his wife had agreed to stand as witnesses, along with Jenkins from the cattle drive and his wife Millie. The banker Simmons was conspicuously absent, though word had it he was furious that his plans for acquiring the Travis property had been foiled. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Zeke promising not only to love and cherish Olivia, but also to care for Emily as his own. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation erupted in applause that seemed as much about celebrating a widow finding her feet again as the union itself. At the modest reception in the church hall afterward, Jenkins clapped Zeke on the shoulder. Never thought I'd see the day, he said with a knowing smile. The confirmed drifter settled down with a ready-made family. Best decision I ever made, Zeke replied, echoing Jenkins's words from the cattle drive. Won't always be easy, Jenkins warned. Ranching's hard work and raising a family's harder, but worth it. I know, Zeke watched as Olivia, now Olivia Alderson, chatted with the doctor's wife, Emily, at her side. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter how hard the fight. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Mitchell approached with an envelope. Wedding present, he explained, deed to 40 acres adjoining your property. Used to belong to old man Hendricks before he passed last fall. No heirs, and I ended up with it for unpaid medical bills. Never had use for it myself. Zeke was stunned by the gesture. Doc, that's too generous. Consider it an investment in Clearwater's future, the doctor interrupted. Good families putting down roots, that's what builds a town worth living in. The ride home, and it was truly home now, was filled with plans and possibilities. The additional land would allow for the cattle operation Zeke had envisioned, while the existing homestead could be expanded for their growing family. Growing family, Olivia questioned with raised eyebrows when Zeke mentioned the phrase. Planning ahead, Mr. Alderson. Zeke felt his cheeks warm, just thinking of possibilities, Mrs. Alderson. Her smile told him it was a possibility she welcomed. Spring arrived with a rush of green across the plains and new life on the homestead. Zeke had used his savings and a small loan from Dr. Mitchell to purchase 20 head of cattle, the nucleus of what they hoped would become a profitable herd. Olivia's garden flourished under her careful tending, and Emily delighted in helping with the chickens and collecting eggs each morning. The expansion to the cabin that Daniel had planned became a reality under Zeke's hands, with a proper bedroom added for Emily and improvements to the main living space. The home that had been on the verge of collapse the previous autumn now stood solid and welcoming, a visible symbol of the family's transformation. Not everything was smooth. The bank continued to be difficult about the mortgage until Zeke paid it off entirely with the proceeds from their first small cattle sale. Drought threatened in early summer, and a wolf pack attacked one of their calves. But each challenge faced together strengthened the bonds between them. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Olivia took Zeke's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. Emily may get that brother or sister sooner than we planned, she said softly. Joy unlike anything Zeke had ever known washed through him. You're sure? Olivia nodded, her smile radiant. Doctor. Mitchell confirmed it yesterday when you were out with the herd. Come February, there'll be another Alderson in this home. Zeke gathered her in his arms, overcome with emotion. From drifter to husband to father-to-be, the transformation seemed miraculous. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For what? For showing me that the frontier isn't just a place of loss and hardship. That even here, especially here, love can take root and grow. Emily joined them on the porch, squeezing between them as had become her habit. What are we looking at? She asked, following their gaze to the horizon. The future, Zeke answered, his arm around his family. Our future. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Zeke Alderson reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been a man without attachments, convinced that the harsh realities of the frontier made love a liability rather than a strength. Now, surrounded by the family that had claimed his heart, he understood the truth. It was not despite the wilderness, but because of it that love became so essential. A shelter in the storm, a light in the darkness, the true meaning of home. The homestead that had once teetered on the edge of ruin now stood as a testament to what could be built when two wounded souls found healing in each other. And as Zeke looked out over the land that would sustain their growing family for generations to come, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not at the end of a trail, but in the heart of a woman brave enough to love again, and in the innocent trust of a child who had taught him that the future was not something to fear but something to build, one day at a time.